We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a full room here, and a bunch of our panelists just flew in for this panel. So I promise that this will be fun. To set the stage for this discussion, I know what it said in the book about trusted entrepreneurs, etc. But I have to tell you, when I pitched this to my friends at Milken, I said, this is going to be about makers meet the sharers. And what does that mean for our economy? And I think it didn't make sense to any of them. And so that's why they wrote something else. But that is actually what it's going to be about. And I'd like to refer, just as introduction, all of our speakers here are in the book, so we're not going to do introductions, and we're hoping that this is a lively discussion. But for those of you that have been here since yesterday, a couple of discussions have happened leading up to this that I think are kind of perfect tee-ups. First, and these guys weren't here, so they didn't hear it, so I'm going to catch them up. First thing yesterday morning, as many of you know, there was the usual Milken lead-in panel, which is what's going on in the global economy. And I thought it was fascinating, and I don't know if Alex Friedman is here, brilliant guy. And Alex made the comment halfway through the panel, you know, we should talk at some point about what is full employment and what is the future of jobs. And it kind of went on, and no one ever addressed it. So that will come back up today in this session. The other discussion that happened yesterday was impact investing. And I think it's interesting to think about impact investing in terms of how it was discussed yesterday, and then what I hope you hear today relative to the companies that are here. I think they would have been perfect examples, but probably didn't call themselves that, of impact investing kinds of companies, and you're going to hear why that is. And last but not least, the other panel that was in this room this morning was focused on crowdfunding. And you're going to see a lot of similarities between some of the discussion that happened there and some of the things that are happening in the platforms here. So what I'd like to do in starting the discussion off is, do you want to pitch one of the slides up?
Sure.
5 or 6?
5 or 6, you choose.
Okay, 5. We'll put up slide 5. So I'd like to lead this off with my friend Lisa Gansky, who was the author of, or is the author of, a book called The Mesh. I call Lisa the kind of mother of all of this in terms of the sharing and the maker economy, in terms of she wrote about it, I think, in a very concise way before anybody else did. And this is kind of the motto behind some of that. So could you talk about, you know, when you wrote the book, what was going on, and what's the context for that today?
Sure. So first of all, hi. Thank
Hi.
you. Delighted to be here. And I wanted to, I guess, to answer that question, just say that I spent most of my life, I'm a reasonably crappy writer and a pretty good entrepreneur. And I wrote the book after being an entrepreneur for 14 or 15 years. It came out of, I sold a company to Kodak, a company called Ophoto to Kodak, and ran digital for Kodak for about 4 years. And after leaving, I realized that, you know, I'm kind of good with one trick, so I'm just going to do another startup. And I went to do another startup in 2006 and realized that the world had become a very different place. We raised $60 million and had 325 people at Ophoto. When I went to start to think about what I would do next, I just started to see how my friends were building startups and quickly did the math on, if we were starting Ophoto in 2006, what would we need? And I had my CFO check my math, and it basically came out to, any guesses? What percentage of the 60 million? 10, 3. But in the right direction. So, you know, the world there's so much capacity and so much capital capacity that has been invested in and distributed around the world, that how we go about doing things has shifted dramatically. And so what drove me to write the book is really around this theme of, we're moving from a world that was organized around ownership to one in which access to goods, services, and talent often triumphs over ownership. And we see that in business-to-business models, in community models, and also certainly in what you'll be hearing from my colleagues, are emerging crowd-oriented or peer-to-peer models. And these are dramatically different than where we've come from. So, so I think that for me, I started to realize it's really causing a real shift from what was the age of the generals, top-down, one-to-many, don't worry, we have this handled. A lot of barriers to entry, all the metaphors that we talk about business or have talked about business were based on a military model that come from the Industrial Revolution. But we're living in a very different time. And so even things like measuring jobs is maybe not the right thing to be measuring. And so one of the conversations I think that we're going to have is, so what are we, how do we create value, and how are we capturing value, and how are we measuring and tracking that? So with that, I'll let you create your own mischief.
Yeah, there was a, I think it was in 2013, there was an Economist article, and the title of the article, I wrote it down somewhere. Oh, the title of the article was Peering, spelled P-E-E-R-I-N-G, into the future. And I think that leads us straight to you, Nate. And so for context here, I mean, as Lisa just said, a lot of these companies don't necessarily raise a lot of money to start. A lot of them are based upon, sharing or making economy. But when you guys started there, I think, at Airbnb in terms of what you were doing, but I think as of this month, you raised something like $450 million from TPG, and the newspaper had you valued at $10 billion. So that's a little different than a small little what we're thinking about in terms of crowdfunding. And I think what we heard and hear about crowdfunding was a lot smaller. Can you talk us through where you guys started in Airbnb, where you are right now, and what's keeping this from scaling further?
Sure. Well, the beginning was certainly quite different than where we are today. So the beginning was in 2007, and it was never even meant to be a business. It was solving a problem that my two co-founders had one weekend, which is that the rent on the apartment was raised 25%, and they didn't have enough money to pay the rent. And there was a design conference coming to San Francisco. They saw that all the hotels were sold out, and so they decided to rent an extra room in the apartment that weekend to make rent. And they made $1,000 that weekend. But they also went to the conference with their 3 guests, and they showed them around the city, and they actually formed real friendships. And so afterwards, we said, this was good for everybody. There must be other people in other situations where we could do the same thing. And so that's what we set out to do in early 2008. That first year was pretty difficult. We did not succeed in raising any venture capital or angel money. Everyone thought this was a crazy idea. After all, how can you trust strangers? Who would want a stranger in their home? Despite that, we pushed on. Then the recession happened in fall of 2008, so things only got more difficult. It wasn't in 2009 that we really started to identify the value proposition and understand how to build a marketplace. And that was, well, 2009 was 5 years ago. And what's happened then is that from New York, which is where we originally kind of incubated this idea successfully. In other words, New York is a very expensive city. A lot of people can't afford to visit New York, or at least not more for a few days. But New York does have so much to offer and is an international destination. People were finding value in Airbnb, and then they were going home to Paris or Berlin, or wherever they came from, and taking that experience that they had and becoming hosts in their own home city. And so there's very quickly a global cross-pollination of this concept. Now play that out over 5 years, and today we have over 600,000 properties around the world, 192 countries, 40,000 different cities. Every single night there's 150,000 other people staying, or 150,000 people staying in other people's homes every single night. So just crazy scale. If you were building a traditional business, you would never be able to accommodate that much capacity so quickly. But this has been powered through word of mouth, and it really illustrates the power of building a marketplace. You set up a set of rules which is around payments and reputation. And then it really becomes a toolbox for others to leverage. I mean, it really democratizes travel and the ability to generate income and meet people. And we were just amazed at the different directions this went in. So the types of things people are renting, for example, we have 600 castles that you can rent. We have hundreds of tree houses, thousands of boats, cars, in addition to villas and houses and apartments and extra bedrooms. So in a lot of ways, it's like eBay, right? Like eBay is full of these things that when they built it for Beanie Babies, like it was never imagined that someday they'd be selling cars and all this other stuff. You see the same thing happening on Airbnb, and I think it speaks to the power of a platform. And well,
can you talk about the early people that were maybe renting their houses out? Because I've read some stories about that, and what that means in terms of like jobs. Are those people entrepreneurs? What are they?
The vast majority of our hosts, if there was like one word to describe them, it would be artists. And we surveyed, a lot of these folks are freelancers, they work part-time. It's almost 40% of them right there. And this is a way for them to supplement their income. Our hosts, on average, are below the median income. And so this money comes in handy for paying life expenses, paying their mortgages. But then it also becomes, once they get by surviving and paying their bills, it then becomes a mechanism for empowering other ventures. So we've seen a lot of small businesses get started that were actually funded through Airbnb revenue. And not just funded through Airbnb revenue, but sometimes enabled by the connections that were made. Like the guests that they hosted were able to connect them with other people in other countries that helped them bring their product abroad or get some other type of wisdom.
So the home is a platform.
Yeah,
so to speak.
for income, for business networking, et cetera.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. So that comes to you. So if he's got a home as a platform kind of around the world, you have a completely, entirely different model, Ben, at Quirky. I mean, I don't even know how to describe it in any way. So can you talk about this in terms of, how did you even think of this?
You're letting Carl off the hook pretty easy.
I'm letting Carl off the hook till the
I hope
end.
you come back to him later. So Quirky's a platform where we build 3 brand new consumer products every single week. People from around the world come and submit their ideas for great new products. They don't have much. A lot of them just have a sentence like, wouldn't it be cool if X, Y, and Z. Some have a prototype, some have patents. It doesn't matter. We're there whenever a creative person puts their hands up in the air and says, that's all I can do. We started about 5 years ago because we believe that the best ideas in the world aren't actually in the world, they're locked in people's heads. Building physical goods, building consumer products is really hard. So we basically try to take that middle chunk out of the picture for people. All of the industrial design, the engineering, the manufacturing, dealing with big box retailers, all that nasty stuff that stands in the way of great ideas actually making it into the real world. So that's what we do.
But it seems like you have like all sorts of different kinds of versions of sharing in terms of, is this making invention accessible to anyone? Anybody can be an inventor kind of using your website?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, this is going to turn into a deposition.
Okay, great.
No, yeah, I mean, people submit their ideas and we make the best ones. We only have one type of work at Quirky, and that's making sure great products wind up on retail shelves. I don't think we necessarily think of ourselves as a sharing company. Obviously, you do have to share your idea to be voted on to get selected. But at the end of the day, we're in the business of making great inventions available to consumers out there.
And aren't you ultimately kind of sharing the incentives around it too?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
The leading the witness.
We do. We share 10% of our revenue back with the community, and we share that 10% based upon how impactful each and every community member was over the successful development of the product. So the average Quirky product is influenced by around 2,000 people. That means when you go and buy a Quirky product at Bed Bath & Beyond or Home Depot, over 2,000 people get paid for that sale based upon the things they helped with, picking the name, the tagline, the colors, helping us figure out what the right feature set is in the product. We share our success.
So incentive alignment is very different
For sure.
than it is for normal companies where people are paying for products. Okay, Carl Bass, you are the CEO of Autodesk, and I told Carl, Somebody said either this morning or yesterday on a panel that the average life of a large company anymore now is only about 12 years. And Autodesk has been around longer than 20 years. And it seems to be a company of reinvention and doing many things. Can you talk about, because you were there, you left, I know you came back, but can you talk about, you know, when you came back in 2006, you became the CEO. What is going on with democratization of manufacturing, and
Sure.
how do you reinvent a company like that?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say to the person, yeah, I mean, averages is like the worst.
I know.
It's the worst number that we learn in grade school. You know, when someone comes to me with an average, I often joke that, you know, on average, we have slightly more than one ovary and slightly less than one testes each.
Yeah.
But I don't actually know anybody. Well, maybe, I'm not sure. So I think there's a couple things about companies, you know, first of all. I don't think any company has the right to go on forever. You know, some people think like there's an inalienable right for companies to go on. And I don't think that's true. I think the way you earn the right to do it is by continuing to satisfy people into the future. So, you know, what we do is we're tool makers. We essentially make engineering and design tools. And I've always taken the position that, you know, just building a beautiful tool by itself, it's kind of sterile. It's like a samurai sword that hangs on the wall or a beautiful machine tool that never gets used. Our work comes to life through the people who use it. So the people who, you know, build the physical infrastructure, the people who design cars and automobiles and consumer products, that's what gives it life. And so what we've kind of done is said, you know, the way we look at it is we try to understand what are our customers really trying to do. And I often ask that question. I know what you just said, but what are you really trying to do? And then, you know, on the other hand, we're like the concierge to technology. We go, what technology is becoming available, not next month, 3 years from now, 5 years, 10 years from now, that's going to change and maybe completely change the way you're going to do your business and get your problem solved. So that's what we've taken on. And it, you know, at times it feels absolutely nuts. We make bets that I don't think many others would make. You know, we reach out to the future in ways that say it. Sometimes we get it right. Hopefully we get it more right than wrong. But that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, and you do seem to looking at the acquisitions that you guys have made over the last couple of years, it seems like you've turned into a completely platform technology company, but in lots of different places.
Yeah, I mean, the things we do, our customers do three things. They build physical infrastructure, buildings, tunnels, roads. They make manufactured products, cars, planes, medical devices, and they make film and video games. So it's three creative activities. The language about it is different. The economic structure of the industries are different. But if you stand back and squint, it's kind of the same thing. Somebody has an idea in their head, and they want to take this idea and turn it into something physical. They're going to turn it into a movie. They're going to turn it into a product. They're going to turn it into a building. Yeah. And so we look at it in a very similar kind of way, and we say, what are you trying to accomplish? And right now we're in this kind of amazing period in which the entire kind of technical computing infrastructure is changing. The way we interact, in terms of cloud and social and mobile, is directly impacting how people go about building products. And so we've spent a lot of time, kind of guessing where that goes and trying to align it with what people are trying to do.
Because in the past, you were, it seems, making products for big companies.
Yeah.
But it looks obvious, and I know that you've been involved with Tech Shop, you're very involved with the maker movement, et cetera. It looks like you're moving into being supportive of an everyday maker as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we've thought this is really important. And so a couple of years ago, we did this crazy experiment. We took a half successful product that allowed people to draw and paint on an iPhone.
How do you know it's half successful?
It was half successful before. It had run on a Mac and it was half successful.
Okay.
I know, because we didn't make any money.
Yeah. That was the determinant.
And two guys went off and took it, and they put this Mac program on an iPhone. And they told me about it like 2 days before they launched it, because I would have said, this is the stupidest idea I ever heard. That's what CEOs, like, who wants a finger paint on a device this big? And it turned out like 25 million people wanted to do it. And within months, we figured out that it was millions of people that wanted to do it. And then we started doing it. And right now, For our professional software, which is most of our business, we have about, in total hamburgers sold over the life of a 30-year company, it's about 15 million users. Consumers and do-it-yourself makers, we now have 175 million people using software that we didn't even know quite existed. So it was a little bit of kind of, putting your foot in the water and trying to figure this out, but we've actually figured it out. And so we got quite interested in this space, and both personally, and now I'm going to turn it back to Ben, and Ben even coerced me into just joining his board because I think what they're doing at Quirky is so interesting in terms of what I see amongst our customers, particularly people who build products in manufacturing. There was a period they went through where quality was everything. It was a Six Sigma. Then they went through a period in which they were trying to reduce costs. And the two things I hear over and over again from our customers these days is, one is about agility. It's how quickly can they get something done, and the other is how quickly can they bring a differentiated product to market. So it's innovation and agility, the two things. And I think almost every one of our customers would die to be able to release 3 products a week.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. And how does what he's doing in terms of using the crowd to kind of affect what their products are going to be, how does that impact your business, you think?
It's a message we bring to our customers every day. It doesn't matter how big a company you are, and I think Bill Joy said this first. There's someone smarter, more creative, better suited to solving the problem who doesn't work for you than works for you.
Yeah.
Anyone who thinks the smartest people in the world work at their company, they're just wrong.
Yeah.
The math doesn't work for that. And so there's always someone else out there who has a better idea, who can solve this problem, who's worked on this. So I see a lot of our companies, and I'm always encouraging our customers to go reach out, that there's something out there. And, and almost every established company will tell you that they don't have enough ideas in their pipeline. The time it takes from the time they get an idea to the time it comes out into the market is too long. I mean, just think of an automobile. You have this insight at an automaker. Right now, someone wakes up and says, electric cars, that seems like a good idea. It will take them 3 to 5 years to act on that.
Yeah.
In this time in which companies last, on average, 12 years.
He's going to use that against me forever.
12 years. 5 years to get a product to market is way too long. Neither one of these guys, took 5 years to bring a product to market.
Yeah.
I think differentiated product is an interesting point to underscore, because that's what these platforms are enabling. We come from a history of mass production for the last 50 years where something gets released and that's the model for a year or 2 years. Most hotels follow a similar template, right? They all feel fairly similar. That's both our advantage and challenge, frankly. No two of our properties are alike. And they're not alike because the vast majority, 80-some% of our hosts are renting their primary home. Right? So this is not a commercial product. This is something that they poured their heart and soul into to personalize to them. And now we make it possible for other travelers, guests, to match their preferences to someone else's home and find something that uniquely meets their needs. But it's also a challenge because we have to play this matchmaker, right? Like personalization is now possible, but it's still hard to achieve in a way that is right for both parties.
Yeah, and you've done a lot on your platform to, similar to Ben, open it up to a wish list, to providing photographers, to, it seems like you guys are reacting very much, not reacting, but you are being very responsive to your customers' needs.
Yeah, like we need to create transparency in the marketplace. So how can we make sure that we have accurate and great photos of all of our inventory and complete profiles? How can we make sure that the really interesting inventory gets pulled out? So like there's certain categories of things that are interesting, like Frank Lloyd Wright homes, right? We have a whole bunch of them. You would never be able to find them normally because you'd be searching for Los Angeles and different communities, and they would be buried in the search results. Now we pull that out and we have a curated collection of this stuff. So discovery is a big challenge and area of investment for us.
Yeah, change the way in which you travel. Just do Frank Lloyd Wright homes. So Lisa, let's talk about the, I've told these guys one of the things I want to hear about is where are their customers in the world? And I know you've traveled a lot around the world working with heads of countries, cities, et cetera, who are interested in this topic. Talk about, is this just like an American phenomena or what?
Well, no, I mean, no. Nate's already said this is. First of all, this is very, very global. There's a certain aspects, certain kinds of services are more predominant in other parts of the world. I think, for example, France is probably a really big market for Airbnb. It's a really big market for food. A lot of the services have been around transportation, so things like Uber and Sidecar and Lyft, if you haven't heard of those. A lot of what's happening has been generated from what I call sort of unused value is waste, and basically converting waste, therefore identifying waste and converting it to value. So identifying excess capacity. We see that with companies. In fact, I don't want to steal your thunder, but you should talk about the IP with GE, and that's a great example. So I'll make a handoff to you.
Okay.
In a sec.
Yeah.
It's good. I'm good. I'll be here all day.
I know. Well, I don't know. They might throw us off eventually. But I think like GE is a good example. There's these ability to identify for big companies, for cities, and for individuals in your. You could say my car sits around, for example, in the U.S. and Western Europe, cars sit around 92% of the time. We use our cars 8%. So second most costly thing for most people sits around. Cities are organized around cars, parking lots, etc. It goes on. And the same thing happens with intellectual property, with factories, with expensive equipment. We were just discussing about expensive equipment in factories. So there's many things that when you look through this lens of converting, tapping into that excess capacity, there's all sorts of value that can be converted. And that's a lot of what's happening with Airbnb and with some of these other services, but also when you tap into people's talents. And so there's a whole collection of networks and things. These are absolutely happening around the world. So, for example, Italy has the most crowdfunding platforms. They've got over 100 crowdfunding platforms. There's a lot of creation and innovation. A lot of them are very skinny, and they specifically target a certain kind of real estate, crowdfunding different sorts of buildings or open spaces. They're being used for infrastructure. Solar City is crowdfunding solar for commercial and residential. So there's a lot of these different models are being tested, and to a point that Nate made is this is very much define, refine, and scale. The platforms, products in many cases are a kind of a straitjacket, and we're seeing companies like, for example, the auto industry is a great example where every major auto manufacturer has redeclared themselves in the mobility business. And they're actually doing things quite actively as very surgical experiments, looking for ways to make kind of shareable offerings or to create more of a service than a product. And I think one of the things that's happening is products are becoming platforms. And I think that we'll pretty soon see, I will be surprised if we don't see, the Ritz-Carlton or the Starwood Hotel network to start to play with private home collections, for example. There's an opportunity because we come from this vertically integrated reality of companies, Kodak grew the cows to make the bones, to make the agar, to make the film that no one buys. But vertical integration is great on the way up and pretty crappy on the way down. And I think that what's happening, for example, when one of the things in this whole way of looking at sharing, but also access and platforms and these new kinds of two-sided marketplaces is resilience. Resilience for the brand, resilience for the business models, and ultimately resilience for the communities, which I think Nate can speak to as well.
Yeah, I want to come back to the communities, cities, et cetera, but go forward to the relationship as an example in IP that you have.
Okay, cool. So GE is a big company that makes things like MRI machines and jet turbines and things like this. They used to be a great consumer product brand, but their focus is now on the industrial side of things. So they hooked up with us, and they decided that they're one of the biggest patent holders in the U.S. I think they have something like 30,000 patents at GE. Now, we convinced them to actually give us all their patents and allow us to put them on our website and allow our community to invent with them for non-competitive use. So obviously our community members in the middle of the country who are inventing things that you could buy at Bed Bath & Beyond aren't going to create jet turbines with GE technology, but could a jet turbine technology that GE came up with be really awesome to use in the creation of a new ceiling fan? So GE has basically put all their patents up there, and they're allowing Quirky community members to invent with GE technology. We've started to commercialize products with this. Actually shipping this week, we have a product called Eros, which is the world's smartest air conditioner. It's a window air conditioner that uses GE baseline technology and then adds a bunch of smarts to it. So in New York City during the summer, window air conditioners take up 20% of energy use. There's over 6 million window air conditioners. Our community member, this guy named Garthen Leslie, he worked at the Department of Energy, who is the governing body of air conditioners. And he was like, these air conditioners are really sucking up our global energy footprint. And then he knew we had a relationship with GE. He saw us on Jay Leno. He came to the site. He picked off some GE intellectual property. We sort of took it from there, took the best of GE, added on top of that technologies that allow energy companies to take control of air conditioners during peak periods, allow homeowners to set budgets every month and then triangulate budget, temperature, and cost of energy and turn the AC on and off when it's most appropriate. So this is how big bad GE, big great GE is working with community members all around the world to build smart stuff.
And you love them.
I do love GE.
Yes.
And it's worth noting that Garthen Leslie,
Also loves GE.
Garthen Leslie, who is the guy that submitted the idea on the site, will make something like $700,000 in the next 90 days. So that's fun.
That's a good job.
Great.
And can you talk to us really quickly, and I'd like to ask the other two about your, and I don't even know, Lisa, what is the appropriate word? Is it customer base, user base? I mean, where are they around the world?
Our community?
Oh, community.
Community's all over. It is. It's hard to put a pin in. I mean, we have a great 3D modeling community in Eastern Europe. We have a great, I think everyone has a great 3D modeling community in Eastern Europe. We have a bunch of people who just are on the site naming and pricing things in the UK and up in Canada. We have people doing hardcore, mechanical engineering stuff in Mexico. I mean, it's all over.
It's all over the place.
Yeah, and then like a lot of the ideas are coming right from the middle of the country where you wouldn't expect.
Yeah. And you, where are your
So we have
communities of buyers and sellers?
Yeah, we have properties everywhere, practically 40,000 different cities, 192 countries. But out of the 600,000 properties, less than 150,000 of them are in the United States. So I mean, they're literally everywhere, and they're not by any means concentrated here, even though this concept was born here. Likewise, from the travelers, they're coming from all over the world. The majority of the business is now outside the U.S. So cross-pollination, quite global. And also, when you look at where this thing is going, France is the fastest growing country in Europe. So in a lot of ways, they're leading the pack in terms of early adoption of this new sharing model, which some might find surprising. In Asia, Korea is the fastest growing country. Korea is the fastest growing country in the world right now for our concept. So even Asia, where the culture is quite different, we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm for the sharing model. And
in both of your cases, are these millennials? Are they
No.
all over the place?
No, Garthen, the inventor of the air conditioner, is 68 years old, lives in Washington, D.C. The majority of our inventors are a bit older. We do have younger folks on our site doing things like naming and taglines and lower tech stuff, but it's I think when you've had a career of people telling you that your ideas are meaningless unless you're in a leadership position, to when you hear about Quirky and you realize that, wow, like someone's actually going to listen to my idea, that's appealing. whereas most young people still think their ideas are going to be heard by the companies they're about to go work for. So,
Take note of that, both of you.
I mean, when you build a platform, you can be amazed at like some of the users and like what their backgrounds are. So for our hosts, it's quite broad, but some stereotypes that come out are empty nesters. Kids go off to college. Parents are looking to help pay that tuition bill. They're a little bit lonely. They're very friendly. Why not rent out the kids' room? This is a huge demographic on our site. Another one is young couples. There's 2 apartments between the 2 of them. They're spending their time at one person's place or the other. Why not make some money to help finance the lifestyle?
Yeah.
A third is if people are traveling on business. You're all here right now. Do you have a vacant apartment somewhere? One of our first users who, I mean, we weren't initially thinking of these use cases, but one of our early users was Barry Manilow's drummer. And when he went on tour, he's like, I want to rent my whole apartment on your site. And originally, we were a site just where you could rent extra bedrooms. And then Barry Manilow's drummer calls us up and says, I want to rent the entire place. We're like, you can't do that. Who's going to serve them breakfast? And then he convinced us that we should waive that requirement. And then now, today, we have these boats and the tree houses and castles, and it's gone in all these interesting directions.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And so what about policy? I mean, we have to talk policy. And I think policy, doesn't it intersect somewhat with communities, cities, states, et cetera?
It does.
And how has this changed since Zipcar was one of the early sharing companies to today?
Well, not fast enough. The policies, so, we have a lot of, I mean, it varies by country, first of all. It varies by city, actually. In some cases, it could even vary by neighborhood. So that makes it quite complex. But the whole idea is that, for example, it's like a thread that unravels a sweater. You do that like, oh God, I just took the sleeve off. You pull this thing and you think it's a simple something, and then suddenly you're pissing off the financial services industry, right? Because basically ownership is very connected. I mean, banking and insurance is very connected to ownership. The model's well understood. People like it. When you start to talk about either a collaborative group or a collective owning something or sharing something, and there's risk associated with it, it gets quite complex. So there's peer-to-peer. For example, a guy that we know is a founder of a company called Relay Rides, which is a peer-to-peer car sharing service. Well, when I was writing the book, I interviewed him. He was in Cambridge at the time because he was at Harvard. And he told me the idea, and I said, this is a great idea. The only problem is, what happens when something bad happens? He said, oh, well, I got this insurance broker who, it's totally fine. I said, if I were you and I was the entrepreneur, I would take my neighbor's car that I rented and drive it into something like a tree, just to see like what actually happens, because it's fine until something happens. And the reality is that in a way that's kind of what's taken place, that we're inching towards, there's a lot of resistance, but ultimately I think, when we look at the market cap and the market cap in financial terms and the value and the size of the communities that are participating in these very different and very diverse and global marketplaces, it's inevitable that there's going to be change. And so we're seeing cities like Seoul, Korea, and Amsterdam, Paris, that are basically saying, this is really interesting. We have to figure out how to create, micropreneurship and ways to convert, waste to value and engage the communities. And there's all these benefits in addition, and at some point, if we have time, about resilience, that in the Sandy storm, for example, also a place where I think Nate has a good story. New York was hit with this awesome, horrible event. A lot of the data that came out of it was communities that were actually more connected, where they knew their neighbors, fared much better than those that didn't. And one of the things that, not to sort of sound soft in the conversation, but one of the benefits that comes out of this are relationships, are actually people are getting more connected to each other. And I think that happens in Ben's platform as well as it happens with something that Carl is hosting inside of Autodesk, is a platform called Instructables, which has 25 million participants around the world, and obviously something like Airbnb. So all of these things are bringing us, technology is making us closer in ways that are interesting, and I think will actually make one of the next big social platforms our neighborhood.
Yeah, technology is definitely making the world a smaller place, and like something like Airbnb, a platform, is allowing people to connect in new and unusual ways. So, certainly we see a lot of friendships, long-lasting friendships come out of this. We see business ideas being exchanged and supported. But then, Hurricane Sandy is an example where one of our community members tweeted out that she was making her apartment freely available to anyone who needed a place to stay during the storm. We saw that tweet and we said, hey, that's a great thing. Maybe there's other people like her who'd want to do this. Why don't we just email out to the community and say that they can do this now on the platform? And after sending that email, within 2 days, we had about 1,500 properties that were offered for free of charge for anyone who needed it during the aftermath of the storm. And hundreds of people were able to find shelter that way. So like totally not anticipated use of the platform, and one that not only did some good in the moment, but I think really fostered a sense of community.
The one other point for me is that resilience in terms of platforms and brands is, hotels, for example, so the Intercontinental Hotel, about 63-year-old company with 650,000 rooms, is about the same size in terms of rooms as Airbnb is in less than 6 years. But the other thing is that when there's the World Cup in Rio or the Sandy storm, a platform like this can be a whole lot more, responsive to demand surges and other sorts of challenges than something that's so rigid as these other structures. So then I think I'm certainly biased, but I'm seeing very much that cities are coming around to this kind of thinking.
Yeah, and I think we just saw that with Warren Buffett being a great salesman for you and trying to push people into Airbnb when they come to the Berkshire Hathaway.
Well, there's a lot of examples of
meeting.
these really global events that attract a huge number of people, whether it's the Olympics or Berkshire Hathaway or, in general, most cities have big ambition on attracting more tourists, and tourism is going to go through the roof over the next 5-10 years. And there are some cities that just aren't going to be able to scale fast enough to support that.
Yeah.
So like Tel Aviv, for example, they only have 9,000 hotel rooms compared to New York City that has 110,000. And even small cities in the US often have 10,000 hotel rooms. Tel Aviv is an international destination. They want to double their tourism yet again. There's no way they can realistically build enough capacity because of the restrictions on land use, et cetera. Yet we have in Tel Aviv about 4,000 or 5,000 people who are offering up extra rooms, entire places for travelers and providing great local experiences.
And are you finding places elsewhere in the world that are more policy supportive?
So I think it's really important for us to communicate some of the surprising benefits of the model. So one thing we found, for example, in New York, is that over the next 12 months, we will generate $768 million in economic impact. And so 1/3 of that number is directly from travelers paying hosts for accommodation. And these hosts, again, are people renting their primary homes. They're below the median income. They're oftentimes using this money to pay their mortgage. So it's directly helping them to stay in their home. The other 2/3 is getting spent at restaurants and shopping. And because our properties are spread throughout New York, including places like Brooklyn, you have a lot of tourism dollars being spent now in those neighborhoods and being spent at small businesses. So it's being invested into the local economy. Small businesses are the power of the economy. And when cities think about it from that lens, they see an opportunity. They say, this is a really good thing. This is a really interesting thing. Let's have a constructive dialogue. But the challenge is, we have one website, regardless of what country you come from in the world, Airbnb.com. That's the site you see when you're in China, Korea, France. So we've created a global platform, yet every single city, and we're in 40,000 different cities, basically has rules around accommodation, and usually rules that are at least 30 years old.
Yeah.
And so there is a lot of policy that needs to be thought through in this new context, and that's the challenge for us.
Yeah, and I want to be able to open this up before we run out of time for people that have questions. But Carl, one of the surprising things is I think everybody does think about this in the space of sharing of homes, sharing of cars, sharing of ideas, inventions, product. But you guys somehow have gotten into the life science space. Talk about that, because I know there's a lot of life science people here, and the thought of whether it be the sharing economy or platform or whatever in life science doesn't translate. So tell us, what are you doing?
Okay,
With
so
Organovo.
Okay, so, well, just in general, I'll give you the segue just to synthetic biology. I mean, one of the things that's happening on all these platforms is that they're all driven by software. At the heart of many of these things, not all, but many are being driven by software that's facilitating this interaction. And most of it runs on traditional hardware. When we started, like I said, part of what we do is try to look towards the future and try to figure out what's going on. And I think the hardware of the future is biology. It sounds a little bit crazy, but we are now 3D printing tissue. We're working with people who are making nanoscale robots for drug delivery. And what we decided to do is we said we had learned a whole bunch about how to design things in the inert world. And we said, what can you take from those learnings and bring it to the biological world? And in particular, many of the things we talked about in terms of sourcing ideas, particularly at the forefront of biology and medicine, it's fairly academic, it's a shared community. So these ideas are coming from a wide range of people across the globe, and we empowered them with tools that say, the 3 people to build a nanoscale robot may not sit in your office, but it's around the world, and how are you going to do drug delivery? In this case, they're doing, they're building these nanoscale robots out of DNA used as a structural component. You mail order DNA, which by the way you can now do. It's 3D printed. You tell them the sequence of base pairs that you want. It gets delivered in a vial. You add water and you shake it up. And biological phenomena has this really nice thing that inert stuff doesn't have, in that it self-assembles. You don't need an army. You don't need a factory. You put it together in a vial and you shake it, and it gets together in a deterministic way. So we started to see that this was the new way. Even when we talk about things like being able to biologically produce a car, people say nonsense. This is crazy talk. What do you mean you're going to grow a car? I say, well, think of a maple tree. I mean, it's all encoded in a seed this big. You plop it in the ground, and lo and behold, right conditions, something comes out that looks more or less like a maple tree. And so we will actually be able to grow things. And so that was the idea, and was to use a big platform in order to do it.
Yeah, and I do want to open it up for questions, but just one last comment, Lisa, is I wanted him to talk about this because if we think about policy barriers are difficult with, whether it be just plain old IP sharing or cars or homes, why is no one paying attention to any of these other spaces?
I just tell you one story. The other day, from a text file listing the base pairs, we booted a virus.
Yeah, there you go.
So we booted a virus. Someone sent us a text file. We ordered the DNA. We plopped it into a petri dish, and it reproduced. And so this is one of the first times in the world people have ever, from a text file, been able to boot a virus. And it's funny, the researchers working on it, one guy in particular, I look at it, and I've been walking around saying this is a little bit crazy talk. And he looks at me and says, what's the big deal? A virus is 2K. We've been programming 2K for 50 years.
That is really funny.
Okay,
Scary,
I think we
but
had a
funny.
question up here.
Serena Rossa from Australia. I knew there was a reason why I came here. Firstly, this has been just so exciting for me. I'm involved in jobs, education and training in Australia and the UK. But Nat, you've blown me away. Nat, would you, have you considered, how Steve Jobs uses all these apps and these connected, to the phone. Have you considered alliancing yourself with people like me, where not only can they have the accommodation, but we could then get them a part-time job, or we could, serve them meals, or, there's more that you could do in these great cities like Australia and the UK. Can I join you? You're amazing.
There you go.
This is a great point. Yeah, it's amazing how passionate our community is.
Oh, by the way, I just wanted to know.
Exactly,
I just wanted you to know, I was really proud to be able to announce that I'm the founder of a 35-year-old company this year. Now I just feel that I'm just ordinary. I've got to, break the pattern. Thank you.
No, thank you. I mean, what we've seen is that, I mean, clearly people are incredibly passionate about this, and we've been blown away by some of the things that our hosts want to provide. I mean, it starts with their home and the amount of care and love that they put into what they provide there. But there's a lot of enthusiasm, and that's partly, I think, our competitive advantage to explore, is how do we further the platform to enable people as basically micro-entrepreneurs to do good things. And I think there's a lot of value that can be added around the trip. So this is definitely an area that I think is interesting in the near future.
Which does come back, and I don't know if anybody else has.
You haven't said yes to me.
She's good.
She's Australian.
The question is when.
Charming but
The
relentless.
question is when. That was very good too. But this does come back to the one thing in the title of this that was truthful, which is trust. And Carl, I think you see that in the maker community. You know, the makers get together, they figure out who can do what, who can support who can share tools. Your Instructables clearly has played this out. Where do all of you think trust is in your
Or I'd say
world?
reputation is one of the key words.
I think that's what's tied together. I mean, the two things that have most surprised me in our world is, one is the willingness of people to share information. I remember, kind of growing up, if I wanted to learn about something, I went to the New York City Public Library, looked in the Dewey Decimal System, and maybe there was a book published 20 years ago on the subject. Nowadays, I go online and I find the information instantaneously. And what's interesting about it is the willingness to share and what the rewards are, because I think it's not only it's this recognition that allows people to do it. I find it all the time. So, like on our Instructable site, which is the site where people publish how to make stuff, and it's everything from making cupcakes to making thermonuclear devices. Everything is on there. It doesn't matter. When I get an email from someone on the Instructables community, I answer that one right away. Compared to all the other stuff in my inbox. And it's something about being emotionally connected with the people. And so I'm always interested, what's the reward and recognition that drives people to do it? And then along with that is, trust, which I think how you manage reputation on these marketplaces is incredibly important.
Yeah, which if you've never rented on Airbnb, if you're going to, you read everything that other people that have stayed there said before you rent. I mean,
Yeah, at the end of each transaction, the guest reviews the host, but the host also reviews the guest, and both parties accumulate a reputation. And if anyone's reputation becomes negative, they're removed from the platform automatically.
Yeah. By the way, if you guys don't know your Uber reputation, ask them. They actually deny that they do it, but
Yeah,
you can ask your driver, and you actually have an Uber rating.
yeah. Question. We have a question.
Hi, Shami Fineglass. I actually am a former regulator, so that underlies this question.
Oh, that's good.
So,
we're in trouble now.
and I'm in the health sector. So the question I had is, you guys have talked about regulation or policy that are old and around accommodation, around IP, but I'm really interested in the health sector because it's where I live also as a physician. And the question is, there's a ton of regulation there. And it'd be really cool if someone could say, go to Quirky and say, I want to design a new knee. You can get that knee done. How do you then commercialize it? Where does it move after it's created by you or you at the end?
Yeah, I mean, our promise to our community is that if an invention is proven to be wanted by the world, we'll take on all that hard stuff. Like, we'll fight that battle. This is on a much smaller scale than a knee, but about 2 years ago, we commercialized a pivoting power strip, right? So this power strip actually pivots so you could fit all the power bricks into the power strip. It was an idea from a 21-year-old kid in Wisconsin, and UL and ETL and all like the governing testing labs didn't know how to test a pivoting power strip, and it took us like 3, 6, 8 months to have them literally write new regulation on how many times a power strip needs to pivot in order for it to be safe to have in someone's home, and it turns out 6,000 times. Which is complete bullshit. Anyway, it's cool though. It does. They pivot 6,000 times. But Jake didn't have to worry about that. Our inventor. All he had to worry about is coming up with a great idea. So that's hard for us as a company, is to take on all that crap. We did the same thing just last a couple months ago with Energy Star for the air conditioner. And we do it because we believe that people in the middle of the country with great ideas shouldn't have to worry about that. We'll worry about that for them. That's one of the things we do for our community. Yeah.
I was just going to say that there's a tension that's conspicuous between innovation and trust and safety. And, you know, we have the same thing in cities with whether it's new materials, new energy systems, infrastructure, certainly new platforms like this. It's the same thing, right? And so back to you, you know, is maybe you should do a panel, is
I am tomorrow.
good okay, on this topic. So, but is the question, you know, there's a moment in time in which we ask the question, I ask the question, you know, are regulations protecting incumbents? Are we promoting innovation? Is there something that we can create called an innovation permit that allows us to have the kids don't try this at home space, right, where we get to screw around with something and pivot it 6,000 times or whatever, and then we say, fine, it's okay. But, you know, other countries, other places than the U.S. Are much more open to these sorts of things. And being from the U.S. and watching the process and the behavior, I'm increasingly concerned.
Yeah, the one thing I would just say, particularly in the medical devices and pharmaceuticals, I think the incentives are off there. I mean, you can be, the FDA, if they always err on the side of safety, never has to approve anything.
Right.
Correct.
That's really the essence of the problem. You never get in trouble for saying no.
Yeah.
Whereas in business, you know,
get
part of our
fired.
job is finding places where we can actually say yes. And, you know, I'm not sure any of us are going to solve that. There's a fundamental flaw in the system of regulation.
Right. Correct.
But I think you can empower people to take choices, you know.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's experimental drugs or, you know, I would be willing to have a knee implant of a better one instead of having them run, you know, $12 million worth of tests.
Yeah, but it is about multi-sided marketplaces and transparency. I mean, I think that's the
Yes.
common element that we've heard throughout here. And in the life science space in general, there's not a multi-sided, and there's definitely not transparency. We have one more, and then I know we have to close.
Oh,
Okay.
we have another one.
Can we hear more about Carl's nanoscale robots?
No.
If you send me a text file, I'll boot a virus for you.
In answer to your question about FDA and looking at safety and what patients actually really want, they have recently started some initiatives to actually look at just that and have
Right.
patients on a panel look at what risk will you actually accept. So it will take a really long time, so don't get me wrong on the
Right.
pace of this.
Yeah.
But they are trying to address some bit of innovation because they realize some of this is stifling.
No, there's a story. This may be an urban myth, but it was at least told to me by Dean Kamen. And he told me about someone at the FDA who had made it through their entire career without approving a single thing.
Well, that's probably true.
Yeah.
And so whether it's true or not,
How long that career was.
right, but
Yeah.
it is, but
Right.
but that's kind of criminal. The one thing I
Right.
would say that's working on the transparency is the fact that this information's everywhere.
Right.
You can go other places in the world if the procedures are not done in places.
Right.
You know about it being done successfully. It was much easier in the past for governments to obscure this information.
Yeah, and when we can start seeing Yelp for doctors, Yelp for hospitals, et cetera, we will have
Yeah.
much more transparency. So I know that we have to close. Thank you all for flying in for this. I hope that you've gotten investors excited about the multi-sided marketplace that you're all in, and that you all weren't tricked into coming here because we talked about reputation and trust, and that was in the title. We squeezed it in at the very end. And that you're all going to participate in these multi-sided marketplaces going forward. So thank you guys for doing the leadership that you're doing.